Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LL3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful, swampy Mango, South Florida, and today's date is Friday, February 21st, 2020. A little bit raining outside, a little bit mellowed right now. Everyone's probably waiting for spring break, and of course, I'm just wondering if it's going to distract vacationers around this time due to the sewage issue in the Venice of America. I was watching this video pertaining to that, and the commissioners not trying to put things to blame. To an extent, they have inherited it. Don't get me wrong, but it should have been done a long time ago. So I like to thank all the predecessors, whether they're elected or appointed, for making this into a reality. Some of you are lawyers, believe they're smarter than everybody else. However, you just live in a wet dream. You've been out of touch in the real world. That's how I gotta look at it. I'm at Stash, located at 109 Southwest 2nd Avenue, in the heart of the Henry Street District of Fort Lauderdale, adjacent with America's Backyard and Revolution Live. Looks like I'm going to be doing a couple of topics, and one's about the coronavirus in China, Wuhan. Some interesting claims are going on. The official narrative is technically been debunked. And we're going to talk about Abraham Lincoln. You can blame him for what's happening with America today. And I'll explain that as well. Well, why not? Without further ado, let's check it out. Hit the site here. This is from LouRockwell.com. It's entitled, "Are They Burning Dead Bodies in Wuhan, China to Hide the Inadvertent Release of a Mortal Nerve Toxin?" This is by Bill Sardi. As it reads here, a marginal credible website, UFO Spotlight, has over 500,000 views for its chilling OMG report that states the true magnitude of China's coronavirus outbreak when unmasked is unfathomable. The author is not posting the exact URL over concern from the spread of more misinformation. Said to originate from an interview of a Chinese intelligence officer who says he's in grave danger because of this infectious disease outbreak is being used to consolidate political power and control over their population, and that sources inside the USA are complicit with this hidden agenda, namely to manipulate and control thinking patterns of its citizens and strike a terrifying level of fear that gets the masses to do what their overseers demand. Interesting meritable claim there, but remember, fear is a great weapon. So, and Kio Bono, who benefits? That's you gotta always question these things. And as I proceed, the story says there is no coronavirus. That was made up to cover for the horror that resulted from a toxin that was mistakenly released. The reports talk of 21 vial of some sort of transmissible and invisible aerosolized nerve agent that was in the process of being handed off from the Chinese to CIA Western security agents when it was dropped at an open market and began to spread. The report says China bought a weaponized Wuhan virus from the U.S. to cover for release of the nerve toxin. The toxin was intended to induce mental decline and reduction of higher thinking processes. Ain't that insane or what? It ended up causing panic attacks with rapid deterioration of entire systems in the body, with arteries melting and tissues disintegration. That causes its sufferers to beg to be put to death. Fatality rate is 100%, says this first person report. An eerie video is shown of a fleet of disinfection trucks.
Say the word.
They release a foggy mist combining through the streets of Wuhan at night. Even the very existence of these trucks is very fear-evoking. Only special mask protects against it, said a report. Newly constructed hospitals said the Chinese military officers are just morgues. Is your hair standing straight up now? Here's the truth. There are millions of dead bodies being incinerated in or near Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the current coronavirus epidemic. As evidence is the smoky air that is seen in Wuhan, calling the coronavirus death smog. Self-proclaimed whistleblowers claim the sulfur dioxide smoke commonly seen in aerial photos of the city of Wuhan emanates from incinerators and serves as evidence of mass cremations. And there are sulfur dioxide maps to prove it. There's a link for that. One moment. As I continue on, sulfur dioxide is a smelly gas, like burnt matches released naturally in the atmosphere, usually from crude oil burning in power plants or other factories. Months before the coronavirus outbreak, there were protests in Wuhan over installation of a waste incineration plant, while Wuhan residents wary of an incinerator that could be used to hide dead bodies in a mass culling of the population. That's a question. It is reported that there are 84 incinerators in funeral homes in Wuhan that have a capacity to perform over 2,000 cremations in a day, and that they are working around the clock in recent weeks. A Radio Free Asia news report says there are 70,000 infections in Wuhan, but an unconfirmed source in China says there were over 500,000 infections, with a 2% mortality rate. That could result in more than 10,000 deaths, not the 2,000 widely reported. Well, this is speculation. The numbers can be confirmed by digging up graves. Incinerated bodies are ash. Most human populations have no pre-existing antibodies against this newly mutated coronavirus, save for a few who have been affected and developed their own antibodies naturally. Without a vaccine, there is no approved vaccine. So fear strikes deep and fast around the world, with the prospect of a massive die-off of human populations looming in the back of people's minds. The world masses could be forced to comply with their overseers to spare themselves such horror. If this is mutated coronavirus, or the inadvertently released toxin have killed millions, half of the population of Wuhan, China is missing, said to have fled the city once quarantines were announced. Did the mass number of missing humans die from mutated coronavirus infection and or the nerve toxin with a resultant government ruse to hide what would be the greatest loss to human life since the Black Plague? But hold up. The news reports are sensationalists, used to draw web traffic from all over the globe. The millions of dead bodies being incarcerated are pigs, not humans. Other viral outbreaks, the African swine fever, have been devastating swine herds in China and Europe since 2018, wiping out roughly 1/4 of the world's pigs. The African swine fever is highly contagious and kills off pig herds rapidly, but does not threaten human populations. China used to have 440 million pigs, a number that has been cut in half. Can we say potential food shortages? Yes. China's hog business has reportedly sustained $1 trillion of losses since August of 2018. The African swine fever has spurred along an effort to develop a vaccine. More disconcerting, there are news reports of criminal gangs in China spreading African swine fever virus to force farmers to sell pigs cheaply. But the satellite images showing sulfur dioxide, or SO2, clusters in the Wuhan area represented commonly high SO2 levels. This satellite data emanates from forecasts and probabilities and may be phone error prone, says a report in Neuro News.
If anything is being incarcerated in mass, it's the swine fever infected pigs. But a question remains, is the COVID-19 coronavirus really a virus, or is some other pathogen? That will be the subject of my next report. So I might have to check that out when it comes. It'll be very interesting indeed. And I'm not surprised, because I know people have been protesting. There's a lot of uprisings in that nation alone. You don't even hear about it. So one of the areas people gotta start looking at, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Precisely. One of the areas we always gotta look at. But like I said before, always stay vigilant with your health. That should be a top priority. Not out of fear, but awareness. I'm not gonna be hiding my cupboard because of the synthetic chemical itself, but you gotta remain absolutely alert and pay attention. Natural News has always been a good site, and I know Spiral did one in reference to the World Military Games a few months before the so-called virus broke out. So you always got to look at those areas. How accurate is the information? So we got to make our own judgments on this. But like I said before, always pay attention. Sorry about that. I'm a little bit tired here. Yeah, I'll be back. Alright, cool. So, next one here. Good little history lesson. This one came from BobLivingstonLetter.com. It's entitled, "We Have Lincoln to Blame for the Mess We're In," by Mr. Livingston himself. As it reads here, the U.S. Constitution was a document designed to place restraints on the federal government the founders were creating, not a document to restrain the people or the states. This is an important distinction. The Constitution would not have been ratified if not for the promise of a Bill of Rights to further check the federal government. That's because most of the founders, particularly anti-federalists, feared the Constitution wasn't strong enough to prevent the federal government from stealing the power from the states. It was commonly understood prior to 1861 that the states reserved the right to secede. There had been talk of secession by the New England states many times. They call it disunion. New England Federalists in the early 1800s feared that Virginia was gaining too much power and would act against the interests of New England states and in the interests of Southern ones. Many of them also opposed the War of 1812. After Thomas Jefferson's election, Federalist Stephen Higginson claimed that the federal government had fallen into the hands of infidel, anti-commercial, anti-New England Southerners who would govern and depress New England. The complaints of New England Federalists essentially mirrored those later made by Southerners advocating for secession in the 1860s. And in fact, in the 1880s and 1840s, abolitionist chief, among them William Lloyd Garrison, called for disunion over the slavery issue. A New England anti-slavery convention was held, and attendees voted in favor of secession by a margin of 250 to 24. So see that secession was not wholly Southern construct. Even Abraham Lincoln, as a representative, recognized the states had the right to secede. He only changed his mind after he became president. Yeah, the greatest president in history, the man who freed the slaves, right? Being duped. To save the Union, which Lincoln stated at the outset was his goal in prosecuting the war, whether he had to preserve slavery or abolish it to do so. Lincoln trampled on the rule of law when he sent federal troops to occupy the seceding states and force them back into the Union. The natural result of Lincoln's actions is the imperial presidency we have today. On November 19th, 1863, at the dedication of the military cemetery at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln spoke these words: 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to me proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, which is a false name for it to be exact, testing whether the nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield on that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who are here gave their lives that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it cannot never forget what they did here. It is for us the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated of the great attack remaining before us. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we are highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. It's curious that he took the phrase that all men are created equal from the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, but stopped there rather than continue with the words, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government. The Civil War is not fought to create a new birth of freedom, as Lincoln suggested, nor did it create government of the people, by the people, for the people. It did quite the opposite. As H.L. Mencken later wrote about the Gettysburg Address in Smart Set in 1920. It is poetry, not logic. Beauty, not sense. Think of that argument in it. Put it into the cold words of every day. The doctrine is simply this, that Union soldiers who died at Gettysburg sacrificed their lives to the cause of self-determination. That the government of the people, by the people, for the people, should not perish from the earth. It is difficult to imagine anything more untrue. The Union soldiers in that battle actually fought against self-determination. It was the Confederates who fought for the right of their people to govern themselves. What was the practical effect of the Battle of Gettysburg? What else than the destruction of old sovereignty of the states, i.e., of the people of the states? The Confederates went into battle free. They came out with their freedom subject to the supervision and veto of the rest of the country. And nearly 20 years that veto was so effective that they enjoyed scarcely more liberty in the political sense than so many convicts in the penitentiary. I'll say here, the states that left the Union to join the Confederacy did so in the true sense of the Jeffersonian principle of self-government, as stated in the Declaration. Lincoln's invasion of the Confederate States stood that idea on its head. The threat of secession was a check on federal power that both New England and Southern states invoked between the ratification of the Constitution and beginning of the Civil War. It was generally understood that because the Constitution was silent on the issue, secession was a viable alternative to checking federal power. In fact, during the Constitutional Convention, a proposal was made to allow federal governments to suppress a seceding state. James Madison proclaimed, a union of the states contained such an ingredient seems to provide for its own destruction. The use of force against the state would look more like a declaration of war than an infliction of punishment, and would be considered by the party attacked as a dissolution of all previous compacts by which it might be bound. The proposal was removed. Lincoln claims in his address that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, would somehow perish from the earth if the Union lost the war was hogwash. Representative democracy would have continued in the Union and in the Confederacy regardless of the outcome. The Union and the Confederacy could have existed side by side as trading partners and allies, just as Mexico and Canada do today. Interesting, because if you read Jefferson Davis's farewell address, he never considered the United States of America as the enemy. There were differences. There were certain conflicts which it wasn't at the best interest of the states. During that time, he represented Mississippi. Some of the slave issues, that was talked about in there, but you always got to look at the bigger picture. You should check that out. I did a show on that a long time ago, so it should be in the archives. And remember, neither side entered the war over the issue of slavery. Lincoln's stated purpose for invading the Confederacy was preserving the Union. Finally, the final outcome of the Civil War did not usher in a new birth of a nation. It did quite the opposite. It consolidated federal powers, neutered the 9th and 10th Amendments, and gave birth to the fascist system and the imperial presidency under which we now suffer. There is no check on federal power. The states are essentially meaningless, and the political class is running roughshod over the Constitution and our traditional situations. Do Republicans really want to think of themselves as belonging to the party of Lincoln? There's some interesting research to check out, history.com, The Real Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, which is really good. Of course, The Civil War by Bruce Cannon. I have read that book, The Real Lincoln, and it's very disturbing when you look at tyranny. And Abraham Lincoln was a tyrant. People criticized him. You could say he helped resurrect the Alien Sedition Act. Shut down the press, throw them in prison for calling them out. Yep, has happened. Habeas corpus is out the window. And the Conscription Act of 1863, the draft. And if you owe as long as you pay $300, you can get out of that lottery. $300 then is $30,000 today, estimate. Can you say involuntary servitude? Absolutely. But contrary to his assassination, I can say this: the banksters was involved. Based on my homework, when you try to get a loan from the second bank in the United States of America, I could be mistaken, it was the central bank. They say, we'll give you the money, but at 35% interest. He had a cow. He almost fell off his chair. But the Secretary of Treasury goes, Mr. President, Congress can regulate money. That's when it went to greenbacks. Greenbacks interest-free money. And who did that in 1963 was Executive Order 11,110? John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK himself. They both were murdered by the banksters, as far as I'm concerned. They were involved. And they both death to the head. Wound to the head. So those areas I could admire from Lincoln about doing greenbacks. But a lot of his other actions is very disturbing. He was a centralizer. Not the greatest president out there. And folks like to recommend start reading books like that and see things a lot bigger than what it is. Of course, he had a rough childhood. I'm not going to knock that at all. But as president, very controversial man. But they use him as a pedestal, like a memorial, with the bench. And on the arms of the bench, you can see a symbol of fascists. What you look at the House of Chambers, House of Congress, the Chambers. the two fascists in between the Speaker of the House. It means dominance and control. And of course, Benito Mussolini used that on his flags and for Italy. That got banned after his death. So, what do you guys say about that? I recommend everyone do the homework on it. And you share me information on your intake on Lincoln, and give me, and you've got information, you got good links to send me. Don't be shy. Send it to me. It'd be great. But that is it. I'll thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share through social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or something interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Decorum. Plus, I shall have these footnotes on my Spreaker page. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love. May your guardian spirits be with you.